Good morning, everyone. This hearing is called to order. I'm Commissioner Randall Pinocci. I'm the presiding officer for this hearing. With me today are Commissioners Andy Bukacek, Jeff Wellborn, Vice President Fielder, and I'm hoping our President, Brad Molnar, will show up here pretty soon. Commission Attorney Lucas Hamilton will be advising the commission. The commission staff are also present. This hearing is being transcribed by court reporter Laskowski, court reporting. For the record, the time is 9:01, and I see President Molnar has arrived. The date is Thursday, February 20th, 2025. The commission and its staff are appearing from Helena, Montana in the Bollinger Room of the Montana Public Service Commission. This is the scheduled public hearing for docket number 2024-08088 involving the application of Northwestern Energy West Montana Cut Bank Gas Company for the approval of the purchase and sale of assets and associated relief. I will now take appearances of counsel. Please introduce yourself and who you represent. Northwest Energy, I see you go first.
Good morning, Commission. Sarah Norcott representing Northwestern Energy.
And Shannon Heim for Northwestern Energy.
Good morning, Commissioners. Nick Stoffel with the law firm of Holland & Hart, appearing on behalf of Energy West and Cut.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, Commissioners. Please enter the appearance of Jason Brown for the Montana Consumer Council.
Thank you. Recesses will occur at convenient times during the hearing. I will next ask for public comment. Is there any public comment in the room? Any public comment online? Seeing none. Let's start with accommodations for witnesses. In this pre-hearing memo, Northwestern requested that Jason McCafferty, Aaron Borkman, did I pronounce that right? Borkman, and Bobby Schoppel be excused. Those individuals did not submit testimony, but they did answer data requests. No party objected to Northwestern's request. Those individuals are excused. Northwestern's also requested that Jeffrey Berzina and Jason Merkel be excused. The commission may, however, have questions for those witnesses, so I will not excuse them at this time. Energy West and CBGC have requested that Morgan O'Brien be permitted to appear remotely to testify today. No party objected to that request. Mr. O'Brien will be permitted to appear remotely to testify today. The MCC has requested that David Demucus be excused from today's hearing. No party objected to this request. Mr. Demucus will hereby be excused. The MCC also requested that Ralph Smith be permitted to appear remotely to testify today. No party objected to that request. Mr. Smith will be permitted to appear remotely to testify today. Do the parties have any further requests or accommodations? Seeing none. Do the parties have any formal pre-hearing matters?
Yes, Mr. Chairman. As part of the settlement document, as you probably read, the parties have agreed to or stipulated to move all of the pre-filed testimony into the record without the appearance of those witnesses coming to the witness stand. So I don't know the most efficient way to do this, but I'm happy to move Northwestern's pre-filed testimonies, both direct and rebuttal, into the record.
Any objections?
No objection.
No objection.
The testimony will be permitted and admitted. Let's proceed to opening statements. Oh, I'm sorry.
I'll make the same request for Energy West and Cut Bank's testimony, both the direct and rebuttal being admitted into the record.
I'll make the same request for MCC's testimonies.
Any objections?
No objection.
All right. So admitted.
And Mr. Chairman, if I might, just for the record, for the joint parties. So that would be Northwestern, Energy West, and Cut Bank Gas. Those exhibits will be marked Exhibit JA and then the exhibit number. And we have copies of those to give to the court reporter.
Okay. Let's proceed with opening statements. Would Northwest Energy like to go first?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. And because we have come to a settlement and stipulation today, Council, we've agreed that there will be one joint opening statement, and I will be providing that statement for you today. So good morning, commissioners, staff. Thank you for this opportunity, and I will be brief. Northwestern is most pleased to present a settlement and stipulation between all parties in this docket, covering all contested issues for your consideration. After considering the testimony that you're going to hear today on the settlement, as well as the pre-filed testimonies that have now been admitted into the record, we urge the commission to approve this settlement and the joint parties application, which will allow Northwestern to complete the purchase of these assets. Northwestern is the right choice to own these assets. As you will hear in testimony shortly, Northwestern is a known operator in Montana with a proven track record for reliable and safe service. Northwestern has committed in the settlement to maintain or improve the existing quality of service for these customers. And it should be noted the majority of these customers are already Northwestern Electric customers. Northwestern has also committed in the settlement to maintain the current base rates that are on file with the commission for both Energy West Montana and Cut Bank Gas Company after the closing. This means that these customers will continue to pay rates that were set in 2018 using 2016 costs, rates that the current owner has indicated a plan to come into the commission and ask for an increase in these rates. Through this acquisition and no rate change, these customers will receive the time value of money and are receiving service from investments made on their behalf since 2017 that are not currently recovered in rates. You will hear how the settlement is in the public interest. There is no harm to customers, and there is a net benefit to customers from this transaction. The joint parties worked collaboratively with the Montana Consumer Council to close the gap between our positions and resolve all contested issues. Overall, you will hear today, this is a good settlement, and we hope that the commission agrees with it. And I thank you for your attention. And with that, Northwestern would call Crystal Lale to the witness stand.
Just to be sure, would Energy West like to make a statement?
Based on the agreement between the parties, no, thank you.
And I think she had said that, but I wanted to make sure.
And MCC will also waive opening. Thank you.
All right. So we go on to case in chief then. All right. Applicant Northwestern Energy's case in chief. Ms. Norcott may proceed with your case in chief.
Thank you. And again, with that, Northwestern calls Crystal Lale.
I'd like to swear in all the witnesses at one time if I could. How many witnesses are there?
I guess that depends. Should we swear in Jeff
Oh.
Berzina? Jason Merkel is not here yet, but we could.
Well, we'll swear in what we can.
Okay.
All right. Please stand and raise your right hand. You swear you swear the testimony you're about to give is the truth and nothing but the truth. Okay, thank you. You may be seated. I didn't see them. Did you guys hear that all right? Had your hand up?
We did.
All right, thank you.
Yes.
If there are any other witnesses that are not currently present, please notify me now. And I think we went over that at the time the witnesses are called to testify. I may swear them in and then they can provide their testimony. Please proceed.
Thank you. Ms. Lale, would you please state your name, spelling your last name, and your business address for the record?
My name is Crystal Lale, last name L-A-I-L. Business address is 3010 West 69th Street, Sioux Falls, South Dakota, 57108. I work for Northwestern Energy.
And would you please provide the commission with your title at Northwestern Energy?
Chief Financial Officer.
And Ms. Lael, can you please identify the document in front of you?
Sure, I have in front of me Exhibit JA 009, which is the stipulation and settlement agreement amongst the parties.
And are you familiar with this document?
Yes, I am.
Did you sign this document on behalf of Northwestern?
Yes.
Mr. Chairman, with that, I would move for the admission of Exhibit JA9.
No
Any
objection.
objections?
No objection.
Okay. That's it, Nick.
Thank you. Ms. Lael, does Exhibit JA9 resolve all contested issues in this docket between the joint applicants and the Montana Consumer Council?
Yes, it does.
And generally for the commission, can you please identify the contested issues prior to the settlement?
There were several issues raised by the Consumer Council. Those involved overall transaction price and how the associated acquisition premium would be calculated. Those involve certain costs of the transaction. Also involve certain questions with regard of the transition of ownership as to the structure of the deal and impacts on future rate making, such as ADIT, and also issues raised with regard to ongoing commitments to investment and service quality.
Do you believe this settlement is a fair, equitable, and comprehensive resolution of those issues that is in the public interest?
Yes, I do.
Why?
I think, number one, when you think about the settlement overall, it was a collaborative approach between Hope, Northwestern, and the Consumer Council to address the issues I just discussed. So we collaborated to find a path forward to address those. And I think the settlement is comprehensive in doing so. As we've talked about, there's no remaining open items or contested issues that we're bringing before you today. But in addition to that, a settlement that addresses those key issues is that the public interest, I think about when serving, providing critical gas services much broader than just rates or some of those things. It's commitment to service quality. It's commitment to ongoing investment to safely and reliably serving these customers. And I think what the commission has before us here is a settlement that addresses the key issues, but also a known operator that will continue, serves Montanans today and is looking forward to serving this group of Montanans as well.
Ms. Lael, turning to page 2 of the exhibit, I'd like to have you walk the commission through the conditions that the joint parties have agreed to in this docket in exchange for the MCC supporting approval of the acquisition, starting with provision 3A.
Okay, page 2 of the settlement. And item 3 addresses, there's the, I'll call it lawyer preamble before that. And then we get into the meat of what were the issues and how did we address them. So I will give you maybe my shorter version of what each of these paragraphs mean from a customer and commitment perspective. So item 3A addresses that we will provide at least 12 months of actual, think of the cost of service data that actually supports what is prudent to serve customers, et cetera. We're committing that the first time we come in for a base rate increase, that we will provide 12 months of data that supports that request. Item B, continuing that same theme, is lots of discussion around what it costs to serve customers today. So there's a commitment from Hope to provide accounting records and detail related to their cost of service for 2024 and up and until, should the commission approve this transaction, in 25, details related to trial balances, GL data, et cetera, and that those would be made available in the first filing for consideration. Item C gets to the ADIT issue and commits that both parties will provide data related to that. Hope will provide data related to ADIT upon closing of this transaction, ADIT being accumulated deferred income taxes, so a component of rate base. So Hope will provide data on that. We also make a commitment that in our first filing, we will provide clear data on that, and that all arguments related to that issue are preserved for when they are most ripe, which is future rate making, the first time we would request a change in rates for these customers. Item D requires us to make a commitment to not request recovery of transaction costs associated with this deal. So you will see we have committed to that here in item D. And item E is related to the acquisition premium. So we have agreed, again, in a collaborative settlement to not request recovery of that acquisition premium at a future time. Item F falls under a bit of the ring fencing associated with these assets. So we have established ring fencing in our holdco docket. And in that docket, we're committing to that the EWM and CBGC assets fall under that same jurisdictional ring fencing that currently applies to the Montana assets. And so that's carried forward in item F here today. Item G commits that we will provide access to all the books and records that Northwestern Energy has and Great Falls Gas and Cut Bank Gas and the transactions associated with that. Item H gets to the ability to sell or transfer these assets. So we are committing what is a standard commitment is that this commission has purview over any transfer or sell of these assets, and that commitment remains. And then if there are any individual assets from the newly transacted legal entities here with a net book value of over $1 million that we would seek to transfer, that we would notify the Commission and Consumer Council of that. Item I reflects a commitment that we would file a compliance report no later than 120 days following the quarter that included the closing of the transaction with the final purchase price and related costs of the acquisition. Item G, clarify, item J, going backwards apparently. Item J commits that no later than 60 days following the quarter that included the closing of the transaction, that the initial detailed journal entries, so think that initial accounting for the transaction and how that reflects the stipulation, that those journal entries would be filed. And then in any purchase accounting, there's a period of time under GAAP that you can update those entries to final. So you may not have all that information. It's saying that no later than 12 months we'll file the final version of that. That's the commitment, item J. Item K gets to cost allocation and what impacts might be within our current assets and the addition of these assets. So we are committing to update our cost allocation manual that governs how those are addressed in rate making no later than 12 months from the date of closing the transaction. Item L, we are committing within 60 days following the quarter that includes closing of the transaction that we will file the accounting entries with the Commission and MCC showing the accounting of the assets and liabilities acquired as a result of the balance of the transaction and our opening balance sheet. Item M gets to some of the cost discussion, and we have committed that all rebranding costs associated with the transaction will not be sought for recovery and borne by Northwestern. Item N addresses the $200,000 credit that the Hope Utilities had agreed to in a prior transaction, and that customers will receive that credit, affirming that commitment. Item O commits that we will continue to meet all the infrastructure related commitments as to serving these customers, whether they relate to DIMP, the Distribution Infrastructure Maintenance Plan, or PHMSA, pipeline safety, and reiterates our commitments to those. Item P reiterates our commitment to, of course, following the applicable MPSC rules and FERC uniform system of accounts as it relates to accounting for these assets. And then item Q represents our commitment to maintain or improve the existing quality of service for these customers.
Thank you, Ms. Lael. You've already testified that you believe the approval of this settlement allowing Northwestern to acquire these assets is in the public interest. In your opinion, are customers harmed by this transaction, including the resulting settlement, if approved by the Commission?
No, I do not think customers are harmed by this transaction. Importantly, rates are not changing upon closure of this transaction. Customers will continue we have committed to stepping into the rates that they are currently paying today, and customers will continue to pay those rates upon closure of the transaction. When I think about harm for customers, the other piece is you're getting a known Montana operator that operates a safe, reliable system today. So you continue to get that same level of service. Obviously, Hope has served these customers well. You know how we operate in the state of Montana, so you have a known operator. I believe that's no harm to customers. And then we've also made commitments as to the ongoing infrastructure investment, as I just detailed out in the settlement agreement with relation to DIMP and PHMSA and ongoing investment there. So for those reasons, I certainly believe there's no harm to customers from this transaction.
And I believe that you just testified to this point, but just to reiterate, is Northwestern seeking approval to change rates for Energy West Montana or Cut Bank Gas customers at the closing of the transaction?
No, we are not. A key component of our initial proposal, and certainly reflected in the collaborative agreement here amongst the parties, is that there is no change in rates for customers upon closure of this transaction.
And does Northwestern have an estimate of what these future rates would be for customers under Northwestern's ownership?
No, we can't at this point anticipate or really predict with any degree of precision what our cost of service will be related to these customers versus what it may be today for Energy West. I think the key things to think about with that is that the settlement agreement does specifically address certain costs. I just laid out for you our commitment to not request recovery of the acquisition premium, to not request recovery of transaction costs, that there's no rebranding costs that we'll recover. So the settlement clearly addresses both A, there's certain costs that we won't be able to request recovery of, and then B, that all of those other issues with regard to rate making are held for the commission's future review and adjudication at a future time.
Do you think it's an issue for the commission not to have that information when deciding this matter?
No, I don't think that's an issue given what we've laid out here today. Again, we're not seeking change in rates today. All of those arguments are preserved for future rate making, and you'll have a docket in front of you at some point to determine the prudency of those costs, et cetera. And then broadly and thinking about that, because rates aren't changing today. And then we've already talked about how we believe this collaborative settlement reflects that it is in the proposed transaction is in the public interest and that there's no harm to customers. I don't think the commission needs to have that answer today.
So, Ms. Hill, with respect to the aided issue that's covered in paragraph 3C of the settlement, why is this condition reasonable in your opinion?
Sure. Paragraph 3C gets into a super fun topic, which is accumulated deferred income taxes and how that affects components of rate base. And then ultimately the rate making formula, it is one element of those. And the importance of that provision is there was a lot of discussion and appropriately raised of what is a timing difference of how taxes are paid over time. And all of that is preserved for when I think the appropriate discussion is when you bring in that full rate making formula and you address what is rate based elements, including aided, you address the other cost of service elements, and all arguments are preserved for when the commission will address rates for these customers in the future.
Do you believe there are net benefits from Northwestern acquiring these assets?
I certainly think customers continue to receive the benefits of paying rates in 2025 that reflect 2016's cost of service. The commission has in front of it annual reports filed by Energy West and Cut Bank Gas that reflect that they're under earning from a cost of service perspective today. I think also Morgan O'Brien's testimony addresses that they had planned to file a rate review and had filed a waiver of marginal cost of service study. So all that reflects that the costs are in excess, which no surprise to anyone. I don't think there's anything that costs less than it did in 2016. So customers continuing to pay via this transaction and really pushing out the timing of any adjustment to rates, I believe is certainly a benefit to customers and how they should think about this transaction, that they will continue to pay really a discount to what it really costs to serve them today. I think it's also certainly a benefit to customers that they are going from one solid utility operator to another known Montana operator, and that they will continue to receive a high level of service quality and commitment to safe and reliable service. There's also the added benefit that Hope had agreed to in a prior transaction that customers would receive a $200,000 benefit if another transaction comes up, or $200,000 spread to customers. And so that's also a benefit to them that they will receive that as a part of this transaction if approved.
Overall, would you recommend the commission approve the settlement?
Yes, I would.
Ms. Lael, do you have any concluding remarks for the commission?
A couple of overall themes I would just highlight in how we think about this transaction. One, the settlement's reflected collaboration and the good work of the Consumer Council of raising issues and making sure that they were addressed, and a good approach to getting through those issues, putting a comprehensive settlement in front of the commission. I think this commission also broadly, we've addressed how I believe the settlement addresses the key themes of how you think about these transactions and whether you apply them all or not, whether it's public interest, no harm, net benefits. We've addressed all that, but the overarching part of thinking about the responsibility we have to serve, and for you as commission to consider whether someone stepping in to serve these customers can provide safe, reliable service. You know how we serve Montanans today, and we would expect to continue that level of service. We're an in-state provider. We're already here. It makes sense for us to own these assets. Obviously, these assets have come up for sale previously as a part of a broader portfolio. So for us to have the opportunity to acquire just the Montana assets, I think it makes sense. And we're the rightful owner of these assets and committed to serving them. And then fundamentally, many of these, as we've alluded to, many of these customers are electric customers today. So there will be a lot of overlap, and we'll begin to serve both electric and gas. I think the community of Great Falls knows that we're committed to that town. Our employees enjoy serving there. And I think the Energy West employees will enjoy being a part of what we do in that commitment to service there too. So that's an overarching part of, does it make sense for us to own these assets? We've put before you a settlement that meets those standards, but certainly for the commission to think about the ability to deliver on service quality and deliver safe, reliable service, I think we're the right owner for these assets.
Thank you, Ms. Lael. And with that, Mr. Chairman, Ms. Lael is available for questioning from the commission.
Thank you. We normally would move into cross-examination, but I understand the parties have agreed to refrain from cross-examination. Without objection, we will move into commission questions.
No
Commissioner
objection.
Wellborn. Oh, I'm sorry.
I said no objection.
Oh, okay.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Question for Ms. Lael, please. Ms. Lael, if I could draw your attention to paragraph H. And just a point of clarification, if I may, where it states that the sale or transfer of assets over a net book value of $1 million, is that an aggregate amount or is that a per transaction amount?
I would read that as a per transaction amount.
Thank you.
Okay, President Molnar.
Thank you, Chairman. For Crystal Gale, I have some pass outs that I like to have passed out at this time. And we also have the same thing available electronically so people can see it split screen. I would ask that they be passed out.
We'll take a 2-minute recess to get that done. Has everyone received a copy? Anyone needing one? With that, President Molnar, please proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just as a matter of course, I'm not going to move this into evidence. There's things that I'm not fully aware of on this. So we'll just have a discussion on your feelings on this. But seeing as how your testimony will be sworn testimony and you have an honest face, I'll believe everything you say.
Excellent.
Mr. Chairman, those gathered here, this is from January 24 to February 25th this year. Two graphs that go to the cost of natural gas and a comparison between Northwestern Energy, MDU, and Energy West. Ms. Lael, in every month for the last year, and I'm gathering information from previous years. I just don't have it to share right now, but I've been told it looks the same. MDU and Energy West, Energy West. I may have the wrong one here. I'm going to set this aside for now because I needed cutbank. So never mind. But I will ask you a question then. In comparison to MDU and cutbank gas, are you consistently higher in cost compared to those two? In delivered per therm, decatherm, however you want to look at it, to customers.
President Molnar, I'm happy to try to give you what at least my knowledge is on this difference, whether cutbank's on here or the Energy West price. So I am not our gas supply expert, and we do have some of those, but I do know in general what drives a high level of this difference in pricing between what you see in here of Energy West rates in particular and Northwestern's system rates in particular. And I believe these are just the pass-through supply component of those rates. I believe that's what is reflected here. Is that correct?
If you take a look at the back, it is explained somewhat. MDU's power cost supply for fuel. So yes, that would be correct.
Okay.
Capacity purchases, generation pipeline charges, and reagent costs.
Okay, I will give you my general understanding of these. And so in Montana, on the system, there's two large points at which gas supply comes in. There's ACO to the north, which reflects Canadian gas, and then there's CIG to the south, which is more of the Rockies gas. The Energy West customers, obviously the northern part of Montana and Great Falls is taking their gas largely, I think it's around, and again, this are my general knowledge, enough to be dangerous, but around 90% of that gas comes off of ACO. And your comment on historic data points, historically, you will see that ACO is always cheaper than CIG. So the rates you would see for Northwestern's total system, of course, we serve the northern part of Montana, but we also serve the southern part of the Montana. So when you think CIG and what comes in by Bozeman, that's always going to be more expensive than Canadian gas that comes off of ACO. And when the Energy West customers are served off of supply off of ACO, you're going to see a lower price. And of course, we pass through these costs, same as Energy West, with no markup. The costs are what they are. So the question would be, what drives a price differential between ACO and that Canadian gas versus Rockies gas? And again, my general econ 101 of supply and demand. This is what I know about Canadian gas. And now I'll get to where I'm dangerous probably, because our supply folks will be cringing when they listen to me. But Canadian gas, really that natural gas is a byproduct of oil. Obviously, Canada has rich natural resources. The natural gas is a byproduct of really oil production, and they really have a limited demand as to where that gas can go. So Montana customers absolutely benefit. And when we see prices spike on CIG, you will not see that same pricing impact off of ACO. And ultimately, supply and demand does indeed work. So there's more supply than demand. And there's a bit of a captive audience as to where that natural gas can go. So that holds a bit of a natural limit on pricing off of ACO. Of course, again, we have to serve the whole state of Montana. So when you think about Northwestern's prices, and we also have to source gas to serve customers and reliably meet that demand. And sometimes that's pretty tough. We have to source off of CIG. You will see that CIG, there's a lot more demand for that gas. And a lot more areas where that gas can flow into. So therefore, the pricing on CIG will historically, you'll look at the trend and correlation, always be higher. So the natural difference between those two trading points you will see the difference reflected absolutely right here, which is customers being served entirely off of ACO to the north will see a lower price over time.
Further question. Back when I was young, we allowed Northwestern to buy gas fields.
Yes.
Are you still providing gas out of those gas fields, and are you selling it at the ACO hub price?
We are still, and I believe Energy West also has some on-system storage as well and some very small wells, but over to the northwestern side of the house. And what you see here is we do have owned production and storage. Now, the pricing of that, I think, is the actual ultimate cost of service underlying that. But the huge benefit of that is that it's a natural price hedge. So of course, supply and demand works. And so when it gets 30 below and you have much higher demands on the system, that price doesn't change. So you don't see market price volatility off of our owned assets. So it represents a really critical component to both hedging price volatility. And again, that's the Northwestern issue, not an Energy West issue. But then fundamentally just the ability to serve off of that storage system. And again, this is the finance person, not the operations person, but from what I've heard, and we do have some operations folks who can address this, that on-system storage also makes a big difference to deliverability on our system and creating compression and those sorts of things. But I am not the best person to answer those benefits.
Maybe you can do this one, because I'm more focused on MDU because they serve pretty much the same area and the prices appear to be quite a bit lower. I realize there's always going to be differences. For instance, you have 3 storage units in Montana for natural gas. MDU has 1. Cut Bank has a very small one. Just maintaining those is a cost difference, and yet there's quite often a cost benefit that goes with that. You're talking about physical hedging. I believe you also do financial hedging. Is that correct?
We buy forward at index, yes. And lock prices at times, yeah.
And how is that working out in general?
I would say in your comment on MDU being in between us and Energy West, it's also important to note, again, the geographical difference I mentioned with Energy West, all that gas coming off of ACO. We think of Southwest Montana, and that's where you really see pricing elevated off of CIG. MDU serves the eastern part of the state. So they have, again, they're not as exposed to the CIG pricing that really drives this difference between the two. What you would see, again, my high level understanding of it between MDU's prices and Northwestern.
So in your opinion, then, are the suppliers going to be the same for Cut Bank Gas and Great Falls after this takes place or not?
Yeah, it's an important question in the sense of our continuity of service here. And we've talked about our commitment to not changing what I think of as the base rates component of it. But your question as to the supply rate component of it, they will continue to have access to the exact same suppliers. And we will continue to procure in the same manner that Energy West and Hope have done today. We expect to be very similar because you're still procuring from that ACO pricing point.
So your owned gas fields will be supplying at the ACO price.
I would say that differently. Energy West assets will serve Energy West customers. So any gas production they own and access to storage will continue to serve those customers. We can't cross over because separate tariffs and rates. So what Northwestern serves today and those gas rates will continue to be what those are. And the elements of cost of service and rate base that serve Northwestern's customers in the state today will continue to be included in that cost. And then the elements that serve Energy West here, there's still a separate tariff and separate rates. So that's part of the settlement is committing us to what we're committed to anyways, which is really separate entities with separate books and records. So the commission has full transparency with that. I would like to think at some point in the future, we can blend these assets together, but day one, until we make a rate making filing and any future filing to run these together, the assets Northwestern owns today for storage and production will continue to serve those gas customers. And the assets at Energy West today, assuming this transaction is approved, that then we bring in will be completely separated and isolated such that you can see that cost tracking.
Okay, thank you. Do you have our little book that they pass out to us? Are you familiar with that?
I
Okay.
don't, but I have my testimony in front of me,
Okay,
if that's
well,
helpful.
It's absolutely critical, but I'm more concerned about if I reference a page number or something from the way we're doing it. So CDL 6, which is your testimony, you say that the customers currently served would benefit from economy of scale and operational efficiencies. What operational efficiencies and economy of scale can they expect, and would that result in a decrease in that part of their cost?
In my reference here, when I think about Northwestern, we have about 700 and some thousand customers. I think 600,000 something are roughly Montana. 200,000, 210, 220 are Montana gas customers. So we would be bringing on this additional 32,000 customers roughly into that fold of overall 210 to 220. I should know these numbers specifically off the top of my head, but over 200,000 gas customers in the state of Montana. And then broadly serving over 600,000 dual service. So when I think about economies of scale, you have Hope Utilities certainly operating a strong utility in the state, but operating that from out of state with a smaller entity, again, serving around 32,000 customers. We serve in the state today and operationally bringing 32,000 customers on, and of course, keeping the books and records separate. But I would expect that there's certainly efficiencies there. The key piece is that in future rate making, you'll get to see all of that actual detail of what it actually takes to the cost to serve these customers and our ability to maybe serve them more efficiently at that time. Also, I think witness Jason Merkel's testimony addresses a bit of how we think about operationally, how that might be impacted. But all of that would be addressed in a future rate making docket because we're not requesting to change rates today.
Well, we'll get into changing rates today later. For right now, could you be a bit more specific? I'm sure in your due diligence, you perhaps spotted efficiencies that et cetera, that say your efficiencies and economy of scale and all of those things. Did you specifically spot some operational changes that would happen with under your new ownership that would benefit the customers? Not theoretical that, well, bigger is better, but, well, look right here, if we do this, if we change that. Did you see anything specifically that would benefit customers?
I would say two things. One, I'm not the operational person, so you might ask Mr. Merkel a similar question, but at a high level, and it's hard to predict the future. I certainly don't want to be in that business, but I would say that serving customers, a larger group of customers within the same state and jurisdictional area, while I can't tell you I can look at one thing and say that's going to be a benefit, I certainly think the ability to serve them at a lower cost is most likely, but I don't know that I can give you for my area of expertise and a specific operational area that would be quantifiable as to synergies today.
Okay, I'll ask Mr. Merkel later. For right now on your CDL 9, we're talking about the $200,000 refund from Addit. I'm assuming, since how this is a income tax question, that rate of depreciation, all of that is available to everyone. Are you taking the same rates of depreciation, et cetera, that would maximize a return to customers in the form of lower rates that they are using? Do you intend to change anything? Because I'm concerned, I realize that in the transaction, some things are left on the table. I am not concerned about that. I'm concerned about from day one forward, will you take the same opportunities through depreciation, bookkeeping, whatever it might be, to maintain a lower rate for customers and not use it in some other way that would benefit the company?
I think there's two things, and I just want to be clear on CDL 9. That $200,000 credit is a credit that Hope Utilities that committed to in a prior transaction is not associated with ADIT. So separately associated with ADIT, your question is, Hope and Energy West would have certain tax positions, and within those tax positions, that deferred tax timing difference. So ADIT is always just a when customers pay it question. It's not whether they pay it. And so the fundamental part of your question gets to that creates a rate-based credit, and certainly tax planning. We want to take all of the available credits because that impacts ultimately then customer bills and how much of that total revenue requirement component is related to taxes, whether that's, the overall gross up or the rate-based components of it. So I certainly think, and you would see in our dockets separately, that we conduct advanced tax planning. And I would expect, again, I while in due diligence, we look at the rates related to Energy West, but I cannot speak to Hope as a consolidated utility and how they may employ tax planning. But to your question of, will we take all tax advantages that are lawful that we can to ultimately reduce our cost of service to customers? The answer is absolutely yes.
Thank you. I was up late last night.
Yeah.
You've already answered that one. And you've answered that one. We're going quickly now. We've had a broad running discussion, and I appreciate that.
Absolutely.
This goes back to the lower rate that we're seeing in this, and I believe we'd find if I go back a bit further and perhaps dig a little deeper, but you're talking about combining the management. This would be in PSC 76, JCM 10. Oh, that's Jason Merkel. I'm sorry. You know what, Mr. Chairman? I am done with this witness.
Thank you, President Molnar. I liked your chart very much. If you have time in a recess, if you'd like to get cut bank added to that and rehanded out, I encourage it. That was really nice you did that.
If I have requested something similar, I'm going to make sure that I'm well understood. If we can get it in time, that's fine. If not, we may have to send out a questionnaire.
Well, thank you for that chart. Who would like to go next? Vice President Fielder.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ms. Lill, help me understand paragraph, the ADIT component of this. So the settlement addresses it. MCC had expressed concerns originally that that by removing ADIT or eliminating ADIT would potentially harm ratepayers. Can you please explain to me how that potential harm expressed by MCC is resolved by this agreement?
Sure, Vice President Fielder, and taxes are such a fun discussion. So ADIT, again, accumulated deferred income taxes. So, we take certain tax deductions. Energy West does this too. If you're unable to use those at a current time, and of course there's tax advantage code to infrastructure investment, et cetera, it creates a deferred tax balance. So you can't use all of that benefit today. It becomes a deferred tax balance, and that gets caught up in it as an element of rate base. The question is the ADIT component that Hope Utilities had on Energy West books. That's an obligation of deferred taxes they owe. And because of the structure of the transaction, it does not, that obligation and or credit does not transfer to Northwestern. Now, immediately upon closure of the transaction, Northwestern will begin to rebuild its own version of ADIT. And if you look at our rates separate from Energy West, you would see a significant component of ADIT within that. So the questions came up, and some of the questions, the exchange I had with President Molnar on, can you predict in the future what certain costs will be and operating efficiencies, overall elements of cost of service? And the reason I say that is ADIT is one component of the rate making formula. It becomes a calculation within rate base. Then it's rate base times a return plus your cost of service, think your O&M. So it's one component of that overall picture. And we can't predict, because we're not changing rates in this proceeding, what ADIT will look like at a future date. So the settlement says it's an important consideration in the transaction and it has to be addressed. How do we best address that? And we best address that by saying the right time to take that up is when you seek to change rates overall. And that ADIT component will be included within an element of rate base and within the overall formula. And we preserve all arguments related to that for the commission to decide at a future date.
Thank you. So to recap, to make sure I understand this clearly, any obligations that the existing owner has now will be the obligation of the existing owner. And then the settlement agreement provides for, I think, what I would call transparency and record keeping and bookkeeping that MCC and Commission can look at as far as Northwestern Energy's ADIT calculations going forward. Is that correct?
I think that's a very, and probably the rest of the statement I should have said is that they're making sure that to preserve these arguments for the future. Obviously, when you get to the future to argue about it, you probably need some data points and transparency as to what those were. So that's, we tried to lay all that out in the paragraph that Hope will provide their ADIT balance at the closure of the transaction. Obviously, as a normal part of rate making, when we file for a rate review, we will provide what the ADIT balances are at that time. So you're preserving all those arguments with a degree of very specific transparency to make sure that that's the appropriate time to address them.
Thank you very much. I appreciate that.
Commissioner Bukacek, any questions?
No questions, Mr. Chair.
Okay, I have a few. It's been very emotional in Great Falls because the customer base in Great Falls is, I think, very happy with Energy West, and they've been in business for years. So I've been at a few meetings where people have expressed that, you know, the rates are going to go up and Pinocchio, you have to stop this. And I explained to them that I can't. You know, we can ask questions. I encouraged everyone in these meetings to call in today. But the other thing I did is I said, I promised to ask your questions. So probably by saying that, nobody's going to call in and they're going to say, you better ask the questions. But I'd like to start with Northwest Energy took over Sleepy Hollow in the Winifred area. And I can't tell you how thankful I am that you guys did that. And the rates are lower. And the service is better. Now, it's easy to say service is better, but I want to explain why. I'll go to one point. Their billing wasn't even delivered month to month. It was sporadic. I had complaints here where they hadn't received a bill in 4 months. And since you've taken over, they've got their billing on time in the mail every month. And I want to thank you. And I want to remind everybody this was a huge success. Rates were lower, service is better. That's a good place to start. So with that, some of the questions I have kind of apply to your testimony, and some of them don't really. So certainly pass it on to someone else. Don't feel that you have to answer a question, certainly not in your testimony. But it seems like all the questions are partially in your testimony. So a concern, of course, is Energy West seems to have had lower rates than Northwest Energy for the Great Falls customers. So they're convinced, very concerned that once Northwestern takes over, the rates are going to go up. Now, I understand that rates are going to be frozen at the same rate for a year. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay. So, of course, they said, well, do your job, Pinocchio, and ask for 2 years. I said, well, I don't know that I can do that. So a concern came up that the reason the rates are lower is because when Energy West buys gas, they make their purchase agreement. They've been getting a better deal than Northwestern. Do you think that's true?
No, I don't think they're getting a better deal. And I think as we talked about, you know, of course, you guys devil in the detail, but customers don't understand that there's multiple components of rates. So there's the components of rates that I had the exchange with Commissioner President Molnar on, which is the supply component of rates. And then there's the base rate. What's the infrastructure in the ground, times of return, all those sorts of things. So we've committed to, and I think importantly to answer customers is these assets will continue to be separate and on their own rate schedules and tariffs, and our filing will reflect that. Then the additional piece of, gosh, are they just getting a better deal than Northwestern's broader customers get, comes back to this difference between ACO and CIG. So we will transact in the same way that the Energy West and Hope Utilities folks do today, but the ability to serve Southwest Montana off of a different pipeline versus Great Falls customers absolutely benefit from, they probably don't know how much they benefit from their Canadian friends across the border, and having that excess, byproduct gas that comes in, that will still be the same contract. We all, the good part about market dynamics is you really can't cut a better deal. You have to cut a price at what ACO is, willing seller, willing buyer. So Great Falls customers will continue to have access to the exact same gas that they've had access to in the past. And so that us owning the assets versus anyone else who might come into the state and be interested in owning the assets, that is not a differentiator ultimately in what customers will pay.
When buying gas ahead of time, there's a risk. You might get a good deal, but then after you make the deal, all of a sudden a better deal becomes available, but you've already made your purchase agreement for the next year or 6 months. Do you think that Northwest Energy has been able to show that they've had more of a benefit buying ahead than if they did not? And then the question came up, perhaps Energy West has been a little more shrewd in those buy forward agreements. Do you think that Energy West has outperformed Northwest Energy in gas purchasing?
No, I don't think that's the difference at all. I think it comes back to, again, where you're purchasing, right? The purchase point off of ACO versus Northwestern's broader system reflects both ACO and CIG together. And CIG's historically, you're going to look back, that's a separate pricing differential for all the broader economic reasons of supply and demand that exist on those systems. I also think the component of procuring gas in the future, you're not only in our obligation to serve, it is not only can you get the absolute lowest price always, it is can you make sure you can serve. So locking in future price also means limiting price volatility. And it means we are going to be able to serve them when it's coldest and there's the most constraints on the system, that we are signed up for capacity and we are signed up for supply. So when we think about risk mitigation, it is always fundamentally, we have an obligation to serve and we have to be able to do that. So when you lock in future pricing, you are locking in taking a quantity and making sure that you actually have access to that gas to serve customers. And I can tell you, we never want to be in a spot where we're curtailing gas customers. So that obligation to serve is the fundamental overarching component of, are we doing gas supply well? So many times I think about, if you lock $4 of gas in the future, your upside maybe would have been, could you have gotten $3 gas at some point? I don't know, but here's what I do know. We can absolutely serve customers because we have a commitment from that supplier to deliver to us. The upside to that, if you hadn't locked $4 gas, where we see prices blow out in the winter, is much more, it's not symmetrical, it's more asymmetric. So the chance that prices could go to the extreme upside, which you guys have seen through our supply tracker at times of extreme supply and demand, having locked forward provides insurance to your customers to make sure we can serve them. So all that being said, to say your question of, hey, Energy West has had a procurement approach, Northwestern has a procurement approach. Will customers really see a difference in price because of procurement approach? I certainly don't think that's the case. Again, good for Great Falls customers in northern Montana, access to Canadian gas. And you look back at historic charts, the historic piece there is it's always less expensive than what we have to buy to serve customers on the south end of our system.
Well, here's a tougher question. Energy West customers feel that they've had lower rates than Northwest Energy over the last many years. What's your opinion to that?
Overall, facts versus feelings, maybe. Factually, they have had lower rates. That's no question. And again, the difference is driven by, this would be saying maybe in cost of service, serving a Bozeman customer is more expensive than serving a Great Falls customer because of elements of where pricing supply comes in. But again, Energy West will continue at this point to be a separate entity. And so it's not really driven by the utility serving them and can you negotiate a better deal? It's driven by what is the access to supply and what is the cost of that delivery point. And that's what's reflected in customer rates. So if they've said, hey, I feel like I have lower rates, the facts would show that they have had lower rates, but that's not really an operator difference. That's a market difference.
Okay, my challenge is a little more difficult because you mentioned the difference between Great Falls and Bozeman. But what's interesting in Great Falls is I have Energy West and I have Northwest Energy. So my Northwest Energy customers in Great Falls are asking me, hey, once they purchase Energy West, do you think our rates will fall? And of course, the Energy West customers are worried their rates are going to increase. So when I go back home and have to say, okay, I'm asking this question, can my Great Falls customers who are with Northwest Energy have hope to get rates as low as Energy West? How do I answer that question?
So I think, and this is, I actually been some of the elements of a little bit of confusion in Great Falls of, if you have an issue with Energy West, they'll come to the Northwestern folks and ask them a question. But we fundamentally serve two different customers and different rates, which is electric customers in Great Falls, and Energy West to serve the gas customers. So the electric customers rate is an electric rate, and it will not change at all based off our ownership of these assets. But customers don't really see that difference sometimes and think about it. From a gas customer perspective, again, their rates will continue to reflect and the question of, hey, I don't want my rates to go up. Well, I don't think any of us ever want to pay more, but the reality is certain things cost more. So any change to their future rates, we have to come in, request the commission to allow for that change. You get the opportunity to review whether those costs are prudent and whether that is our actual cost to serve those customers. So while they may not want to hear at times that those costs may go up at some future point, the assurance we can give them is that if their rate as an Energy West customer does go up, it will be because we had to put a case in front of you. And that case had to detail out all the elements of what it costs to serve them and whether those costs are prudent, that the consumer advocate would do the same job they're doing here today, which is to test that detail and test the questions. And if there's a change in rates, it's because there's evidence and facts supporting it.
All right. I want all of you in the room to imagine that you're in Great Falls. Half of the room has Energy West. The other half has Northwestern Energy Gas Service. And you find out that Energy West has lower rates. So guess who they call to complain? Pinochi, I want to hook up to Energy West because they have cheaper gas rates. We have to say, well, there's this imaginary line and you're just stuck. Today, we're talking about that imaginary line disappearing. Now those customers that have been paying the higher rates with Northwestern Energy in Great Falls are going to want the Energy West rates. And now that we're going to be one company, what do you guys think I should do? How do I answer that question now?
Sure. I think fundamentally, one, there's not an imaginary line. There's a very physical line, right? So there's assigned service territory, and Northwestern's gas lines don't, this is part of an obligation to serve. You don't run two gas lines to someone's home and go pick your supplier, right? It isn't a Northwestern pipe today as a part of the distribution network also running to an Energy West pipe, and they ended up on Energy West. This is Energy West service territory that we're looking to acquire. So they don't have the option of, can I be served by Northwestern instead for gas service and picking your rate sort of thing? That's the fundamental components of utility rate making, is because they cannot pick someone else to run a gas line to their house, and that wouldn't be economic. Your job is to stand in the place of competition and make sure the rates that are charged to them are fair. So while that's not always clear to customers, where we do not serve gas to this area today, we certainly do serve electric, but the rates they will pay will reflect the actual cost of service. And that's the assurance that you can absolutely give them. And certainly the systems fundamentally don't overlap in that manner, such that they could choose to be on a Northwestern rate versus an Energy West rate for gas.
Well, the question that's going to happen, and the complaint that's going to come here, is when they sat down to negotiate this, Pinochi, did you try to make an attempt to say, hey, look, we're going to be able to say we're one big happy family in Great Falls, and they're going to be able to get the rate Energy West did, and didn't you negotiate that during the time of the sale? How do I answer that question? And that may not be a question you're comfortable in asking, but you can see that the public is certainly going to turn to the Public Service Commission and say, what are you doing about this? Because these customers that have wanted to be hooked up to Energy West to get the lower rates couldn't. Now we're one big happy family. can we now? And then, of course, the people that are with Northwest Energy in Cascade County that can't get to Energy West are going to say, do we have a shot at those lower rates? How do I answer that?
I would, and it's always hard to get into detailed rate making with customers, right? But I think the assurance you can give them is one, the commission, and the consumer advocate pressed hard on making sure there are commitments with regard to costs for these customers because they are separate. They are separate rates and tariffs. That the commitments with regard to transaction costs and acquisition premium, that there was hard negotiating here as to protecting the customer's interests. You can also tell them that the settlement put in front of you, customers from an Energy West perspective will continue to pay rates based off 2016 until we file a rate review. And filing a rate review means we have to have this transaction has to close. We have to have at least 12 months of data. You know that pulling together a rate review doesn't happen in a week. So it will take some time after that. So Energy West customers will continue to enjoy a lower cost than they would have absent likely the transaction, given that Energy West would have been into file. Separately, the Northwestern customers today, that's separate rate making, and we will be before you and you have purview over that of what is the actual cost of service. And there's always the ability to review whether those costs are prudent, but because the systems are indeed separate, you can't run the two together, even though customers, I certainly understand, don't think about it that way.
Before I go to the next question, I want to talk about reliability. I've got a good compliment for Energy West and Northwestern. My family's owned several businesses in both Energy West and Northwest Energy. And I've never experienced an outage ever. It's the most, natural gas is the most dependable service of any utility, water, electric, and to me, it's been flawless, both companies. So the next question that's come up is Northwestern's expanding. I've got Sleepy Hollow. We're putting a gas line in to Townsend. We bought Energy West. We're companies growing. You go to Sam's Club or Costco, they say it's buying power when you give you the product cheaper. Could rates go down because Northwest Energy is simply expanding and their buying power and their service areas expanding to where can we expect some rates to go down because the company is expanding to a much larger size? What are your thoughts there?
I think to that point, there's always economies of scale, and that's helpful to customers. I think anytime you see us come in for a rate review, you have the costs that went up, that's increased investment, that's O&M costs, labor, all those things. But then the downward pressure is definitely growth because the denominator part of that, of course, if you need $100 of revenue and you spread that over 10 customers, or if you have $100 of revenue and you spread that over 15 customers, right? That growth is always the downward leveler on the frequency of rate cases and how often we have to come in and ask for a change in rates. But also those efficiencies help. And it's always hard to prove the null hypothesis of what costs would have been absent that. But that expansion on the system, I certainly think all else things considered equal is helpful. And to your point, there's always parts of that economies of scale that ultimately get captured in that. The key part is just the broad investment on the system. There is much needed investment to make sure we can continue to serve customers. And there was a lot of build out done in the state in the 80s and 90s that was wonderful. And now we're up against capacity limits and needing to build out again. So all of those things balance in what customers expect to pay, but absolutely growth is a component that helps offset costs to customers.
I may not be here in the next rate case because of term limits. So I'm going to ask the commissioners to remember these questions and bring them up in a future rate case. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Mr. Hamilton.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good morning.
Good morning.
Just a few questions for you. You've already discussed at some length now for the foreseeable future, for the period contemplated by the stipulation and settlement agreement, the customers of Energy West Montana and Cut Bank Gas Company will remain on a separate tariff from the rest of Northwestern's other customers, correct?
Yes.
So they will be receiving separate rates from Northwestern's other customers, correct?
Yes.
Will the Cut Bank and Great Falls customers be expected to contribute towards the revenue requirements for Northwestern's existing production assets?
Again, all of those assets are specifically identifiable and separate in what determines rates. So those existing assets serve the existing customers, and the assets that serve these Energy West customers today will serve the Energy West customers in the future. So my answer to that is, again, separate books and records, separate assets. They don't blend together.
Gotcha. In the meantime, though, while we're in between now and that future rate case where hopefully, as I understand it, Northwestern intends on melding them together, incorporating?
I would absolutely hope we can, from a tracking and cost perspective, find a way that we can work together to meld those rates. Absolutely. That would be the intent on the long term.
Okay. In the meantime, there will be supply cost adjustments for these customers, correct?
Yes.
So will Northwestern be using its existing procurement plans and portfolios in order to procure supply for those customers?
I would say it this way, we're taking the employees at Energy West, and they have employees who do that procurement, while we will bring that into certainly our system of controls and how we go about doing that, and consistent with our risk policy. We will continue to procure in a manner that is the least cost for these customers, and procuring for these customers will be a separate, such that we can make tracker filings that support that. You will have separate evidence of contracts for these customers.
Okay. Part of the plan for procuring supply for customers is hedging through physical storage of your commodity, correct?
Again, for Northwestern's customers today, that's absolutely correct.
Gotcha. So for the storage and the hedging that exists for Northwestern's current customers today, those procurement costs, those supply costs will not be shared by the Great Falls and Cut Bank customers.
No, there's specific rate base associated with that storage, those production assets, specific contracts, that all is specific to Northwestern's existing customers. And again, there's, Energy West continues to serve these customers, and obviously Hope continues that commitment until the point at which this transaction would close. So they're already procuring for their customers and making sure they're meeting those needs within their own risk policy. And we'll continue to do that once we take the assets.
So likewise, the storage assets that Energy West Cut Bank Gas Company currently have will remain dedicated to those customers until such time as you're able to incorporate.
That's correct. Until we could come in and modify the tariff and rates, those are separate assets.
Perfect. So what are the circumstances or events that would lead Northwestern to request commission approval of incorporating those customers in with the rest of Northwestern's natural gas service?
I think a couple of things we've alluded to in this is in other questions of predicting the future. We need to get in and operate these assets. And of course, we have a lot of assumptions, but we all know what they say about assumptions. So we want to get in and actually operate these assets and see what that looks like for a period of time. And then we would absolutely like to identify a path to where we could bring forth with appropriate transparency and evidence why we could bring these customers onto a shared rate. But of course, we don't have the data to do that today. We don't know what our cost of service will be for these customers, et cetera. So at the point in which we do have that data, we certainly would like to do that. But I can't tell you what that will look like until we've actually operated the assets and find out how that looks for us within our overall system, and then how we could bring a proposal to you to make sure it's fair rate making for all customers.
So do you anticipate that first rate filing after the expiration of the hold period and the settlement agreement would be the one where Northwestern requests incorporation?
My answer to that, and my team knows this, is I would like that to be a yes, but I cannot make that commitment today because I don't know what we do know. The cost of service is back in 2016. They're under earning on these assets. Whether we need to bring these assets in and step up to what current cost of service is, and then make a separate filing to try to blend all of the assets together, or if we can do that in one filing. Those are some of the future elements that are, we would bring in at a time of rate making. I can't give you a certain answer as to how we would approach that. And certainly we would look to work with the Consumer Council and staff as to what's the best way to present that evidence and maybe get to that point where all customers are on the same rate.
When Northwestern eventually makes that filing, would Northwestern be presenting the estimated customer impact on a customer class basis that separates Energy West and Cut Bank Gas Company customers out from the rest of Northwestern, or would it be one estimate of customer impact across all of Northwestern's natural gas service?
You're getting into detailed future rate making questions. Here's what I would say about that. Of course, class cost of service is always a part of rate making. And so for the Energy West customers today, you have a separate class cost of service for a residential customer versus a commercial and an industrial. Any filing we make in the future, I think it would have to have customer impacts of what it takes to serve them, what a blended rate looks like, and what does that look like for each class of customers.
Okay, I think that answers all of my questions. Thank you.
Does any party wish to recross the witness following commission and staff questions? Okay. Would you guys like to take a break or call your next witness? Oh, I'm sorry.
If I just could do a few redirect, Mr.
Okay.
Chairman.
Wave at me. Thanks.
Ms. Lael, going back to some questions from President Molnar, and looking at the comparison between Energy West and Cut Bank Gas compared to Northwestern and MDU. In your opinion, is it fair to compare Energy West to the entire system, the entire Northwestern system?
I would say it this way. I think it's a fair question to say fundamentally, why do these rates look different? Indeed, for the reasons I laid out, it's different pipe with different supply and demand and different pricing. So there isn't a way to get to same costs on the both. So it's a fair question to understand why there are differences. But the comparison is really apples and oranges because of the dynamics of Canadian gas versus Rockies gas.
In questions from both President Molnar and Commission legal staff, Mr. Hamilton, you talked about hedging for Northwestern and Energy West and the comparison of the two. And specifically, President Molnar asked you about financial hedges. And Northwestern, you talked about how Northwestern does or buys gas during certain periods of the year and puts that in storage. In your mind, is that a financial hedge?
I used to do technical derivatives accounting. So I will separate out what is truly a financial hedge versus these are all physical delivery purchases of gas. These are not any sort of market transaction purchases where you don't actually deliver the gas. We only engage in transactions where you are fixing a price to deliver on the system.
President Molnar also asked you about any specific operational efficiencies that maybe were discovered in due diligence. Are you aware of whether in, for example, customer care, there were any efficiencies discovered?
It's a good point of, I think what council is doing is reminding me, and certainly I think the way that we and Commissioner Panoche, Chairman Panoche talked about the billing of customers from what we understand. And again, we can't understand all the details, but our process is because we do serve 600,000 customers in the state. And I believe bill them timely and accurately on a monthly basis, that there are certain efficiencies. Just the way Energy West operates is much more manual than what we do today. So I would expect that we will be able to do that in a more efficient manner than is being done today. And mostly moving from a very manual process to bringing them onto an existing system we have and being able to do that from a systematized process.
And Chairman Panoche was asking you about this imaginary line between Northwestern and Energy West customers. And you had talked about the fact that the assets are physically separate, the distribution line to a customer's house, for example. Will these assets that Northwestern hopefully acquires, will they be held in Northwestern Corp?
These assets, so Northwestern Corp, to be clear, and in the separated jurisdictionally is the Montana utility. These assets will be a subsidiary, legal subsidiary to that Northwestern Corporation, Montana utility, appropriately providing for separate jurisdictional ring fencing from our other assets in other states.
Thank you, Ms. Lael. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I have no further questions.
Any redirect? After, temporarily excuse the witness.
Thank you.
You guys want a break or we go to the next witness? Well, 5 minutes. He can't get his chart done. All right, let's do a 10-minute break then. we'll come back at 10:30. Okay, we're back on the record. The time is 10:30 and you may call your next witness.
All right, Energy West and Cut Bank would call Morgan O'Brien. Thank you.
Mr. O'Brien, did you swear in? I believe you did.
Yes.
Okay. You may proceed.
Mr. O'Brien, would you please state your name, spelling your last name, and your business address for the record?
Morgan O'Brien, Obrien, President and CEO at Hope Utilities. And my address is 781 Chestnut Ridge Road, Morgantown, West Virginia.
Did you provide direct and rebuttal testimony in this proceeding? Can you hear me? Did you provide direct and rebuttal testimony in this proceeding?
I did.
Do you have any corrections to that testimony?
No.
Are you familiar with the stipulation and settlement agreement between the joint applicants and the Montana Consumer Council in this proceeding?
I am.
Do you support the stipulation?
Very much so.
Thank you. Mr. O'Brien is available for questions from the commission.
Who would like to go first? No commissioner question? Okay. Oh, President Molnar.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. O'Brien, your RPSC page 89, L 9 through 10 is your testimony. And you talk about short and long-term benefits. Can you tell me what short and long-term benefits have been identified specifically that we can expect to happen?
Yeah, I mean,
9 and 10.
obviously we're the seller, not the buyer, right? So we haven't. We're fundamentally there's benefits of we believe as being part of a larger Northwest energy organization, but as part of our sale process, we wouldn't specifically go through and identify what those benefits would be.
Mr. Chairman, sir, Mr. O'Brien, this was your testimony. So apparently
Yeah, I mean, fundamentally, so I've been a CEO of a utility for 30 years, right? We're in the process of looking at a regional strategy, which centralizing administration, centralizing call center, centralizing a lot of the customer service makes us more efficient. That's as my business, that's intuitive to us that in a transaction like this, Energy West and Cut Bank have been basically standalone businesses, even under our ownership up till now. And so they operate holistically within themselves. And so I think, as you heard earlier, the ability at some point to integrate, billing systems, integrate call centers, integrate, I'll just say supply chains. There's a lot of pieces of a business that you can operate more efficiently as a larger organization. So fundamentally, I mean, that's what utility businesses strive to do, right? Our responsibility to you and really the customer is to operate as efficiently as possible. And so this transaction intuitively to us and looking at how we operate our businesses separately, that there should be some short-term efficiencies here. And then longer term, right, just being part of a bigger organization, there should be efficiencies that you're allocating fixed costs over a larger customer base. Simple mathematics, right? But I said intuitively to me as a utility person with a lot of experience here, there's both short-term and long-term benefits that we've realized on our businesses on doing similar acquisitions and integrating them in our operations.
Thank you. One further question, I believe, Mr. Chairman, Mr. O'Brien. We've heard a lot today already about taking a look after a year for possible rate increases because you have used 2016 as a base year and there's been no rate increase since 2018. And with inflation, that should probably need an adjustment, quite possibly in an upward motion. But inflation only comes into play if you buy something at an inflated price. You live in a $500,000 home. Inflation now says it's a $750,000 home. Your costs have not gone up. So if you're not expecting major physical expenditures, pipes, compression, etc., there would probably not be a need for a rate increase. Are you expecting that there would have to be some upgrades that have not been done since 2016?
You think of the cost of a utility, right? And I know, this is what you guys spend your days doing. There are a lot of different costs. So we do replace pipe, right? So there is capital you invest, but some of our biggest costs are labor costs, right? So the people that work there, and all those people make more in 2025 than they did in 2016, right? So everything else being equal, my costs have gone up to pay people to do the important things they do. Healthcare has gone up, right? The cost to fuel my trucks is dramatically different in 2025 than it was in 2016. If you go through almost every cost item, maybe other than the gas bill in Great Falls, everything's gone up in that time period. So the cost to do the same things we did in 2016 are just incrementally more expensive.
I agree. I lied when I said one more question. So I guess I have one more question, maybe one more lie after that. But return on equity is actually the measurement of that. I'm going to assume that your return on equity in 2018, when you took a rate increase, was probably somewhere near 10%. Do you have an idea right now what your return on equity would be if you brought a case forward? Because
Yeah,
you bring a case forward according to your testimony, and then this.
Yes, we absolutely we were. I would just ballpark it. I don't have that sitting on my fingertips, but it might be half of that. The ROE of what we are today versus what it was in that last rate case.
So you're thinking maybe right around the 5% mark, somewhere in there?
Yeah, 5 to 6% is probably what we're currently earning.
Thank you.
Any other questions from commissioners? Okay, I have a couple. We were talking about cost going up. One thing I didn't hear was property taxes in Great Falls have increased quite a bit. And that's certainly affecting the price to the customer. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's a bit, as a utility, that's a large cost, right?
Well, I sure want to remind the listeners to put pressure on the legislature to keep taxes down, because I get blamed for that here when rates go up and taxes as a pass through. All right, so I think the company Energy West has been doing an incredible job. And one thing that I would like to check with you, it's possible that rates are a little cheaper with Energy West because your customers in a tight area, not so spread out. Northwestern has a real challenge running gas line for large areas to get just to a few customers. Do you think that's a reason why your rates have been a little cheaper than Northwestern's?
I would say, I mean, clearly we haven't had a rate increase since 2016, right? That's an important issue here. To be honest, I've never studied the cost of what it takes to operate the Northwest system. I'm actually not familiar with how broad. I know it's 600,000 customers, but I know in West Virginia we own a utility here, and customers are spread out, and it's very expensive, right? I have to be able to provide the same service on any type of issue to a customer. I have to have people in areas, so it can be pieces of your business can be more expensive. But the real, I'll just say, driver is that there's so many shared costs, right? That if you become part of a bigger organization here, you know, you were talking about this before. It may be that costs would be lower in the future than they otherwise would have been. Um, but they still could go up, right? So there is that concept that's out there, but it's just fundamental in the utility space that a larger utility having more customers, right? The cost per customer is a true helps with customers and affordability.
There's going to be a lot of listeners in this hearing, and they're going to be listening really closely. And you mentioned that, you know, you haven't had a rate increase in a while, and that's the reason rates may be lower. But I'm not going to be able to get away with that. We have to bring this up. Your rates have been lower for years and years and years. Do you agree with that? And you have to say, you know, your track record over many years, it's been cheaper. And of course, they're going to say, what influence could you help with Northwest Energy to continue that? How would you answer that? And let's make it clear, your rates have been lower when you had a rate increase years ago.
Right.
So let's cover those 2 points.
I would say this, that, and it goes back to our starting point. So Energy West Montana, for all intensive purposes, is a self-contained entity. So the people who buy things, the people who make gas supply agreements, the people that do all the things that impact, I'll say, the larger costs, are all coming with it to Northwest Energy. The resources, I'll just say it, the people who have derived the cost of that business are all going to be part of Northwest Energy. So it's not Hope Gas supply teams no longer buying it. They've got a different strategy. The people who do it today will be going over to Northwest Energy, assuming you approve this transaction, right? So they're on day one, right? And maybe over time, you know, smarter people and you can become more efficient. But on day one, on day-to-day things, there really isn't a change from when we own it versus Northwest Energy owning it. So that's a big part of it. The part nobody's asked about, and I'll just throw it in here, the employees at Energy West Montana and Cut Bank are excited to be a part of Northwest Energy. They see it as a well-run utility. They see having opportunities, career opportunities, being part of a bigger organization in Montana. I could never get one of those employees to come here to West Virginia to work for me. They love Montana. Montana's a special place, but they're excited to be part of Northwest Energy.
All right, so they're gonna, I'm thinking my concerned citizens in Great Falls and the ones in Cascade County that don't have Energy West cheaper rates are gonna say, do you think that you can influence somehow or improve the rates by joining Northwestern, not only keeping your rates lower like they have been for many years, but possibly help with getting rates lower outside of Great Falls? And another question is, one of my big challenges here is it's not so difficult for me to say the rates are different from Bozeman to Great Falls. The difficult position I have here is I have different rates inside of Great Falls. Okay, so this makes it puts a lot of pressure on the commission to try to explain that. And this line that, you know, kind of separates the two, is there hope that by joining that you can offer the ability to say we can get rates cheaper in all of Cascade County to match Energy West? What are your thoughts there?
I would say I don't have any hesitation to say Energy West as part of Northwest Energy will be more cost efficient than on a standalone basis. I mean, intuitively to me as a utility person, that the quality of you see the quality of the people that Northwest Energy has, the depth that they have, the understanding of what's Montana markets, how to operate a business in Montana. Their records are impeccable in front of this commission. It's a well-run utility, and I think It's why our folks are excited to have more resources, more ability to provide better service to people. I think our team at Energy West sees it as getting better and stronger, and being able to leverage more things in the long run.
To really listen closely to my constituents in Great Falls, where I have an interesting problem here. I have different rates inside the same town, different rates inside the same county. What do you think this commission can do to help? What ideas do you have for us that could get those rates to be the same throughout Cascade County? What are your thoughts there?
You know, and part of this is, right, there's no scenario that I don't think anybody, I know you've got Ralph Smith and some other really smart people here, but there's no scenario that I have an under earning utility at Energy West and that somehow we're going to replicate those rates, you know, somewhere else. If we didn't do this transaction and you don't approve it, my company is going to be in asking for a rate increase, right? Earning the returns that we earn with all the costs that have gone up. So, I mean, part of the public challenge is that it's not practical to think that Energy West rates are going to stay around under any scenario, right? And where I would go is that the quality of service for the larger utility, you know, you call it a customer that has a gas leak, you've got an issue on a gas line, the additional resources that Northwest Energy has to help the Energy West team when there's a crisis, emergency, is significant. And our team sees that. Having a larger call center when people need help with bills, they need help with questions, you know, being part of a bigger call center where somebody can help them answer their questions, be more efficient about providing that service. All of those, I think, are built around the quality of the service, the ability to provide more resources to the table. And to me, that's a big part of this. And then when you look at costs, I think the fundamental belief is that having more customers to spread costs over will ultimately lower the costs to customers, right, per customer. It's not going to take it back to the rates where Energy West is today. I mean, that would be, to me, it's a challenge I don't think you could possibly meet. But I think you could absolutely represent that the quality of service for important services, the ability to become more efficient from what it would have otherwise been, is absolutely part of this transaction.
I'm listening carefully to you. I do believe that there's a good possibility that a rate increase is due for Energy West. I understand that. But I think what the concerned customers are in Cascade County are going to look at it this way. If Northwest Energy was to get a rate increase and Energy West was to get a rate increase, after that, Energy West would still be cheaper because it's been that way for years and years and years.
Right.
The question is really, and I think the listeners and this commission understands, if you haven't had a rate increase in a while, and we all agree prices went up in insurance, especially taxes. All right, the cost of buying equipment is considerably different than before, outbreak. But back to my question, you've always been cheaper, even after a rate increase, right? Do you think that influence? And there's another question that I'll have you answer too, and then I think I'll be done. Can you tell me, has Energy West been able to add more customer service than Northwestern Energy? Or has Northwest Energy been able to offer more customer service? In other words, is there something that Energy West does that you won't be doing after the buyout, or vice versa? It's a question that's been asked, and I wouldn't be surprised if the answer is nothing, but it's got to be asked. Maybe somebody called and said, wow, I've got a business in Northwest Energy territory, and I have a business in Energy West. And Energy West does this where Northwest Energy does not, or vice versa. Can you tell me about that?
And again, caveat it by saying I'm the seller, not the buyer, right? But it'd be my expectations, right, that as people think about bringing these organizations together, I know on our side of the fence, we've acquired lots of small utilities. We look at best practices, and if there's a service, particularly a tariff service that you guys have approved, that Energy West has the ability to provide customers, I'm sure Northwest Energy is going to review those when they try to consolidate all those tariffs, right? And so my hope and my expectation would be that you do take the best of both, particularly from a customer perspective, right? That's the case. I mean, nobody would. This wouldn't be the headlines of a transaction, but if you take, I'm currently going through a rate case where I have, say, 5 utilities, all different rates, and we're going to put them all on one rates. Those customers that you're worried about who have the high rates, their rates are going to be lower than what they would have been because you've got these other 32,000 customers that once those rates are consolidated, they're paying a share of that, right? So that's just the way utility math works, right?
All right, let's talk about somebody doesn't pay their bill. And you give them a call and say, look, you got to get your bill paid. We're going to turn off your service. I've heard there's a difference between Northwest Energy and Energy West. And perhaps there isn't. Is one company more lenient than the other when it comes to turning off service? What's your experience there? What's your policy compared to Northwestern's? And what policy are we going to go with after we combine the two companies? What are your thoughts there?
Honestly, I've never seen Northwest Energy's policies. I think as a company, we try to be empathetic, right? And I've met the Northwest team. They're good people operating their utility in a very similar fashion. I can't say I've looked at our policies to see, which are better. But I do think as you look at the rate case or other tariff filings that happen, those will come before you and you'll get to weigh in on those issues. So there will be a day when you'll have that in front of you specifically, but for me to testify what the differences are, I honestly don't know.
Well, the ratepayers asking me those questions, and I know that wasn't in your testimony, but
Yeah.
it's exciting to talk to someone who's kind of in charge of one company to say, hey, what are the differences, right? And
Yeah.
the ratepayer concerned about it. I got to try to bring it out.
Yeah.
With that, I have no more questions. Looks like I have a commissioner question, Vice President Fielder.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. O'Brien, I want to go back to something you said here a few minutes ago in your exchange with Commissioner Pinocci, and it has to do with the prices your customers are paying now. What rate are the customers paying now in terms of the year? I mean, it obviously it's been a long time since a rate increase. So are customers paying like 2016 rates right now?
Rates that were approved today, that period, right? Rates haven't changed. Commodities have, right? The chart that you had with all the commodities, that changes. But the underlying delivery service fee hasn't changed.
Okay. So the customers have been paying fluctuating rates based on pass-through costs of energy supply purchases and those types of things. Does that include tax increases as well?
No. So, I mean, the commissioner's point of taxes are probably a big part of why rates would have to go up.
Okay. So if this sale wasn't approved by the commission, I think you said that your company would have to come in for a rate adjustment. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. And so can you just tell us what the difference would be in terms of that rate adjustment versus, is it 2016 versus 2025 or a more recent test year? Is that what the kind of fluctuation that you would be having to bring before the commission?
Yeah, I mean, it's I don't have it quantified in front of me, but it's pretty meaningful. It'd be a meaningful increase to reflect all of those cost increases that we've incurred, in addition to our rates, aren't recovering our allowed return as well, right? So
Okay, so why has it been so long since Energy West and Cut Bank Gas have?
great question. So as part of acquisitions, so this company's been bought and sold a number of times, and each of those agreed to stay out of rates. And so it was an agreed upon as part of the approval process not to come in for rates.
Okay, so is it to your best knowledge, as the CEO of these companies, if this sale is not approved, is it your opinion that your companies would be in asking for a substantial rate increase to catch up to the last rate adjustment?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Any other commissioner questions? Seeing none, I'll turn it over to Lucas Hamilton. Okay. Any redirect?
Yes, a few redirect questions, please.
Go ahead.
So going back to the exchange you just had, Mr. O'Brien, with Commissioner Fielder about pass-through taxes, just to clarify, Energy West and Cut Bank do have a property tax tracking adjustment, right?
Yeah. And it's a delayed item on the property tax though, right?
And it does not include income taxes, right?
Which is, yeah, what I was referring to. Yep.
Just to close out the record, you were talking about how the companies would have come in for a rate increase, but for prior transactions that included a stay out. Do you recall when the earliest they could have filed was?
I believe it was this year, because that was our plan. So
This year, you mean 2024?
yes, test year 24, right?
You mentioned that you're going through some rate cases, having acquired some smaller utilities and are dealing with the rate consolidation issues. Have you dealt with those before in your career?
We have.
Do you find rate consolidation challenging?
I would say could be confusing to customers for a lot of the questions that were being asked here. At the end of the day, it actually is much more efficient in the long run, and it actually brings a lot more clarity in operating those small systems going forward, because it just becomes part of a single entity. You have the same tariffs, same rules. You can do things, I'll say, in a across the board type of approach, as opposed to having different tariffs with different rules for customers, which is very confusing.
And there are going to be two different types of consolidation, right? Base rates and supply rates.
Yes.
Like, you can consolidate both or one or the other, right?
Exactly.
You got the questions around the Energy West and Cut Bank disconnection practices as compared to Northwestern. If the commission has rules governing disconnection, you wouldn't expect those practices to be very different, would you?
I wouldn't, but I don't know it for a fact, right? Yeah.
And then to the extent any differences are reflected in the Energy West and Cut Bank tariffs, you understand Northwestern is proposing to adopt those exact same tariffs, right?
Yes, that's right.
And then you'd had back and forth with President Molnar about the return on equity. And you said the current return on equity is about half of what was approved. If we say 10%, is about 5%.
Yeah, in the 5 to 6% range.
And is that consistent with what you've seen as a market-based return on equity for gas utilities in 2024 and 2025?
It would be closer to the 10%.
Thank you. I have no further questions.
Is there any other redirect? Okay. Should I temporarily
if he could be permanently excused, we'd appreciate it.
any concerns? Legal? Okay, sir, you're permanently excused.
Thank you.
You may call your next witness.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. MCC would call Ralph Smith. who's already been sworn in.
Okay. You've been sworn in, sir. You may proceed.
Yes, yes, I have.
All right. You can hear us, Ralph?
Yes, I can.
All right. His testimony's already been admitted, as well as that of Dr. David Dismukes. And so I don't have any questions, and I would make Mr. Smith available for cross-examination from the commissioners.
Any commission questions? Vice President Fielder.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Smith, as I read this case, you had several points that you had raised initially before the settlement was reached regarding concerns and potential harms to the ratepayer. Have all of your concerns that you raised in this case been addressed by the settlement agreement?
I would say yes, in some respect. They all have been addressed.
Can you elaborate on what, is that a hesitation in some respect? You used the phrase in some respect. Does that mean they haven't been fully addressed?
Well, the settlement agreement, I believe, addresses all of the concerns that were raised in the Consumer Council direct testimony. One of the concerns that we raised was about the form of the transaction, being an asset purchase, as opposed to being a purchase of the stock of Energy West, Montana, and Cutbank Gas Company. With the settlement, the transaction would proceed as an asset purchase, which does result in the extinguishing of the accumulated deferred income taxes on the acquired utilities books. So that part, it has been addressed in one of the settlement provisions, but the transaction is still proceeding as an asset purchase.
Okay, thank you for that. So it is still proceeding, it's proposed to proceed as a transaction of assets, but the concern, is it fair to say that concern or the concerns you had raised have been resolved by the agreement that no transition costs will be included in rate base and no transaction costs will be included in rate base? Is that correct?
But yeah, some of the other concerns, including the transaction costs, I think have been resolved in the settlement.
Okay, thank you.
Any other commissioner questions? Oh, President Mueller.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good morning, Mr. Smith. Morning. On PSC 111, the line 17 through 19, the question was, and this will be from your testimony, did Northwestern provide any estimated impacts on customers from the proposed transactions? And you said no. Just before that, Northwestern asked by the commission to provide estimated bill impacts on customers resulting from the acquisition. And I believe that's also a no. We have covered this with others, but your job is to protect the consumer, not necessarily advocate a buy or a sell. Are you at all concerned that there are no impact statements or possibly the exploring of rate impacts, not necessarily on day one after the purchase, but on day 366 after the 1-year moratorium is off and a rate case has been filed? Yes, Commissioner, that was definitely one of our concerns. Normally in an acquisition, we were expecting to see some type of analysis of the expected benefits, including cost savings and synergies, and also some estimates on the future impact of rates under the new ownership. We didn't really see either of those in this proposed transaction, and that was a concern. And we understand that Energy West and Cutbank haven't had base rate increases in quite a while. And from their annual reports that they file with the commission, it looks like at least Energy West is under earning.
So we understand that there's upward pressure on rates already. And what we're trying to avoid with our review is having additional upward pressure on rates being caused solely by the change in ownership. And it would have been nice to have a lot more details, I think, on what those potential impacts are estimated to be. And we didn't have that in the documentation that we sought from the applicants in this particular transaction. So, and that was a concern.
Further question. I take it from your testimony right now that it would have been common to receive this information. You asked for the information and did not get the information. How does that make you change from a concerned advocate for the consumer to a proponent for the sale?
Definitely it was a concern about the lack of certain information that's commonly provided in respect to ownership change transactions. Again, what we were trying to protect the consumer from were increases in cost that resulted solely due to the change in ownership. And I think the settlement agreement provides coverage of all those issues. The companies agreed that no acquisition premium or goodwill will ever be sought for recovery from ratepayers. That was a big item. I think that was potentially as much as about $14 million. So that'll never show up in rates, according to the settlement. That was a very important issue, a pretty important consumer concern. The settlement addresses transaction costs, rebranding costs. Those both, I think the risk of customers having to pay for that has been eliminated by the settlement agreement. Another one of our major concerns was the extinguishment of the accumulated deferred income taxes on the books of the utilities that are being acquired. The settlement doesn't totally resolve that, but it does preserve what we think is information that is needed to address that in the rate case that occurs under Northwestern's ownership, and preserves the right of the parties to recommend appropriate hold harmless type adjustments in that rate case. So it does preserve the right to address that. It preserves the information and assures that the necessary information will be available. But it kind of kicks the can down the road to that rate case to determine what the quantification will be to hold the customers harmless from that impact, which is an impact of the change in ownership and the form of the transaction.
Thank you for that. I'm just going to briefly go to lines 10 and 15, PSC 119. This is very similar because you get into the edit. Have the applicants offered any provision to prevent the harm to the acquired utility ratepayers that would result from the proposed form of the transaction, which would result in the appropriating of the edit that is accumulated on Energy West and Cut Bank's books? And you're basically saying, I think that as a consumer advocate, it's our job to determine whether or not that is appropriate, or if that happened, or what we should do about it, as opposed to getting an answer and saying, here you go. Am I incorrect in that?
I think you're correct. Yeah, the applicants didn't present an impact to that. We looked at their last rate case and some financial information and rate a rough order of magnitude impact of how much the adit was offsetting the Energy West rate base, how much the adit was offsetting the Cut Bank rate base in the last rate case, and it's significant. And again, the settlement does preserve information and provides a means of addressing how to protect customers from that adverse impact of the change in ownership in the next rate case, but it doesn't fully resolve that issue at this point.
Does that give you any concern, Mr. Smith?
It is a concern, and again, the settlement addresses it, it preserves information, provides for means of addressing it in the next rate case. We would have preferred that the concern was totally eliminated by perhaps changing the form of the transaction to be a stock acquisition. That didn't happen. So it's addressed in the settlement in a way that we believe provides a way to protect ratepayers, but doesn't provide the best protection that we would have liked to see.
Okay, I'll move on. Mr. Smith, your testimony, PSC, page 141, lines 13 through 19. Being there when DSM was created, this caught my eye. Under Northwestern's ownership, will some of the current services to customers that are provided by EWM be discontinued? Prior testimony seemed to say that services would stay the same. In this case, they discontinue a furnace tune-up program they have, which is paid for by DSM. And further on, it's stated that it will be discontinued because that's not what Northwestern does. Two questions. Are you aware of where the money collected from DSM that pays for this program will go and what service that will provide? And B, was this program cost effective for the people that it was served in getting more efficient furnaces and therefore lower cost, and would that be effective?
I don't recall specifically, the first part of the question was where the money goes.
The DSM money?
My understanding is that Energy West would be accounting for that as DSM revenue. And I don't have detailed information on the cost effectiveness of the program. We didn't do a deep dive into the Energy West DSM programs or whether those are cost effective or not. Our main purpose of mentioning that was just to note that that Energy West was providing a program, and Northwest had indicated that they would not be providing that under their ownership. They would discontinue it.
Just a little clarification. Maybe I was wandering around. That happens. DSM is automatically collected. Money from the DSM is going into this program to make sure furnaces are more efficient and therefore customers are paying the lowest cost possible in the heating of their home. If that money doesn't go into this program, it has to go into somewhere else, another DSM program. Are you aware of where that would go? And if so, would it be as beneficial to customers as this particular program?
Yeah, I'm not sure I have answers to those questions. Again, I was under the impression that the furnace tune-up program, I wasn't sure if that was covered by DSM or if that was part of a non-regulated service that Energy West was offering its customers. So I don't recall the details of that, and I don't think we dug down into the granularity of what was included in the Energy West DSM programs.
In testimony, I forget whose testimony it is, paid for by DSM. So thank you very much, Mr. Smith.
Any other commissioner questions? Seeing none. Mr. Hamilton, any questions? Any redirect from any party?
Mr. Chairman, I just have a recross question, if that's okay.
Yes.
So just following up on President Molnar's questions about the furnace program, Mr. Smith, did you read the rebuttal testimony of Jason Merkel in this case, in which he indicated Northwestern learned more about that program and is going to, in fact, continue that program as that program is paid by Energy West's Universal System Benefit Charge?
Did I read that? Yes. Do I recall it at this moment? Not really.
No, that's fair. Thank you. No further questions.
Do we want to permanently excuse or temporarily excuse?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, permanently would be appreciated.
Okay. Before we call our next witness, I wanted to, oh, yes. Oh, you're excused, sir.
Thank you.
I wanted to remind the listeners that Energy Share will help with your heating bill if you need assistance and if you qualify. And to my knowledge, anyone who's qualified has never been turned down. And if the press is covering this story, I'd like that mentioned. Thank you. All right. Who's our next witness?
Mr. Chairman, Northwestern doesn't have any further witnesses to call regarding the settlement, but if the commission has questions for either Mr. Berzina or Mr. Merkel, we're happy to have them called to the stand.
Okay, Mr. Merkel.
I guess with that, Northwestern would call Jason Merkel. And Mr. Merkel was not here earlier, so he will need to be sworn in.
Mr. Merkel, are you ready to swear in? I need you to raise your right hand and swear it. Do you swear the testimony you're about to give is the truth and nothing but the truth? Thank you, sir. You may be seated. President Molnar, you may proceed.
Thank you. I would like to have the court reporter read back the question that I asked Crystal Whale, CFO, VP of Northwestern Energy, that she asked that I refer to Mr. Merkel. Ah. Do you remember the exact wording of my question?
I wrote it down, but it's over there.
No. We are migratory in nature if you'd like to go get it.
I'm sorry, President. I don't have the exact wording.
Should we take a recess, 2 minutes or so?
I can probably find it quickly. I wrote down what it was. I just thought it'd be a lot easier if you had. So we can take 2 minutes if you want to. Or we can watch me thumb through these.
Mr. Chairman, is this the question about specific operational efficiencies? And this isn't verbatim, but it was along the lines of through the due diligence that Northwestern conducted. Did you spot any specific efficiencies during that process?
That's correct. And so my question, Mr. Merkel, and I'll get to the reason for it in a moment, so people don't think I'm just casting a wide net here. During the due diligence, did you spot any efficiencies or capacities to lower rates in the operations of the requested purchase utilities that you could say, aha, if we upgrade this, if we change that, if we connect that, if we replace this compressor, did you notice anything that would be specific that would lead to rate protection, better rates, or are we just going with bigger is better?
Thank you, Mr. President. First, let me start out with, I feel great, but I've been blessed with this little hoarse throat thing. So I apologize for that. If I cough a little bit, I'll get right back to business. But to your question, we did not specifically analyze any of those efficiencies, but certainly during the due diligence and as we got to know Energy West, we identified certainly opportunities where we would be more efficient. And they range from, what kind of impact would they have? You already talked about probably what struck us as the most efficient is these customers, specifically in Great Falls, so of the 32 and change, whatever thousand customers there are, other than Cut Bank and West Yellowstone, these are already our electric customers. They're in our billing system. We have a relationship with them, connection with them. And so anything in the realm of billing, it's just a matter of getting the numbers into our billing system so that we can send it out with our same bill. Those are opportunities that right off the bat. Operationally, there's a number of things, some examples. Some are really small, some probably a little more significant. Today, Energy West still performs meter reading manually, very inefficient, and there's an opportunity there certainly by going to a different technology to allow us to read meters like we do in many of our applications. Another one would be perhaps locating. Right now, whenever a third party is wanting to dig, we send somebody to locate electric, they send somebody to locate gas. That's one send. So there are those type of opportunities to the core of your question, President Molnar.
Thank you. The reason I'm diving somewhat deep into this, perhaps deeper than some would understand, is that we have to put this under one of three criteria. It's of benefit to the customer, no net change to the customer, a disadvantage to the customer. And when people say we're going to buy it, but we don't know if we have to charge a premium to cover interest or purchase costs or whatever the case might be, I'm concerned. In my brief but illustrious career as a human being, I've bought several companies, and before I did, I could see where I would have efficiency so that my competition wouldn't take me out if I tried to raise prices based on the cost of the purchase. I'm a little nonplussed by the answer that we'll send out one person, we'll use better meters. To wit, we recently had a rate increase from Northwestern Energy. During my total time on the commission, and long after that, the discussion was smart meters would be far more efficient. We don't have to send out meter readers. Next thing I know, it's part of a rate increase. The efficiencies didn't cover the cost. Yes, it was more efficient. No, it did not help consumers with their bill. So with that as a background, with my well-earned skepticism that might be debated, can you say that you never looked at piping, compression, interconnecting lines so that you could get around a compressor, more efficient compressors, therefore lowering cost? Is there anything hard, not theoretical, that you looked at and can say, if we do this, it will maintain these costs, lower the cost, or blunt a rate increase?
Well, to the core of your example, Energy West systems are distribution systems. There is no compression. Northwestern Energy is already the provider of the gas transmission. So everything that they realize are pressure cuts. It's not a complex system either. And, you know, I can tell you in the way we do business at Northwestern Energy, and this is not to take away from anything from Energy West. Energy West is a small company. They do a lot of things very, very manual in comparison to our world. And when you look at it from the amount of staff it takes for them to do something, they have more staff to do that something. Their staff also wears many hats. I'm impressed with their capabilities. I'm excited to have that staff work for us, but it's like comparing apples and oranges when it comes to the details of how we do our business much, much more modern. They're still, paper records where we were paper records at the same level on those subjects 20 years ago. There's absolutely no doubt in my mind that Northwestern Energy will be more efficient in almost all the aspects of operating that business. When I said I'm not part of the rate making process, but I certainly understand the costs to operate these assets. And when I sit back and I think about, if I may, Chairman Panocci, your question that was around, how do we deal with this 2 rates in the same district? The future conversation that we're going to have is it right to maintain an area rate? That's where we're going to be. Because I sat back there thinking about your question. And to me, if we were area rates within Northwestern today, and we didn't have the socialized rates, our rates in Great Falls, serving the 8,500 or so customers that we serve in Great Falls, and I would submit Kalispell would be the same with regard to this, and those 35,000 customers, their rates would be less than Energy West. I'm almost sure of it, because they have access to ACO gas. I know we are a more efficient operation. And if we were over history, if we would have been allowed to maintain area rates, they would have been our Northwestern Energy customers. They would have been the lowest rate payers in the state. From a supply perspective, when you throw in the efficiency perspectives, I would argue we would be on the chart that you showed. If you could show by division, they would be the lowest paying area by far. And your problem would be is to explain to Energy West customers why they can't have the lower rate that Northwestern Energy customers are realizing. The way our system is set up, we haven't done that. We are socialized in our costs. And as you move southeast in the state, where so much development is occurring, our rates are driven by the infrastructure that we've had to build to provide for that. I would also answer that Energy West, like many of the smaller operators, Cut Bank Gas certainly, Sleepy Hollow is an example of this. When it comes to that highest risk, they've been able to lean on us in how we operate. So that was a perfect example with Sleepy Hollow. When that outfit just quit operating, who operated it? They never lost gas service. But to my mind, they went for 6 or 8 weeks and never paid a bill. We carried that. We've been that for Energy West and Cut Bank Gas at the highest level risk. We have to plan for, because there's nobody backing us up. So we plan at a much greater level. I think they realize that, yeah, we'll cover these risks, everything that you have to within the tariff, but if it gets really, really bad, they know we're there. So that's how I would answer that question, President Molnar, in a broader context of everything that we do, not only for the state, our customers, but also we've historically provided for Energy West and Cut Bank Gas.
Thank you for that detailed answer. You did mention ACO, and I think, Mr. Chairman, this will be my last question. And on the back of the handout, Northwest Energy Gas supply rate includes the cost of gas, which is what they buy through ACO, et cetera, I'm assuming, gas transportation from other suppliers, as well as the Battle Creek, Bear Paw, and Devon revenue requirements. I believe those are the gas fields that Northwestern Energy owns. Do those revenue requirements place the cost of that gas higher than the ACO hub?
I'm not in gas supply. That's not my area.
Yeah, but you mentioned ACO, so I'm jumping on you.
Yep, and that's fine. My answer would be, I would be surprised if they weren't higher, because that supply gas coming out of Canada, nowhere in the nation, I mean, nowhere, has access to gas at that price. And those fields that you mentioned are, they're older fields. They take maintenance. And I would expect that because the supply rate coming from those production fields are based on the cost to extract that gas, I would absolutely expect that our costs in those production fields would be something higher than ACO.
Further question, you say something higher. You have an idea what that something higher would be in a percentage that would wind up in the supply cost for the acquired utilities, the customers of the acquired utilities?
I don't know in percentage over ACO. Again, not my area. But I would also say that until we get to a rate review process sometime in the future, I don't believe those assets would be allocated to supply gas to Energy West, because those assets are allocated to our Northwestern total portfolio. And I don't believe we're expecting to do that. I think from a supply standpoint, we're taking over a bit of what Energy West was doing, and we're going to continue with the same thing.
Thank you, and thank you for your time, sir. And I appreciate your expertise and your candor.
Thank you.
Question from Vice President Fielder.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Mr. Merkel. So at the beginning of your in-person testimony here, you mentioned a couple of significant areas where you think efficiencies can be found or are expected, and one was billing efficiencies. Can you give an example of what you mean by efficiency in that case?
Again, and that too is not my area, but I certainly work closely with our customer operations that performs the billing. And again, it's those customers are already within our billing system. And in Energy West today, bills are actually manually developed on usage, manually created for each customer, and manually mailed. We have specifically now with where we're at as a company, we're leveraging preference centers, a way to connect to your bill other than a manual bill for those that choose. We certainly can provide a manual bill for those that choose that way. We have many more options. Certainly if a customer chooses to do business with us in a more electronic format, that brings efficiencies to the process. And additionally, we would have abilities to take the meter reading data, submit it. It doesn't take manual processing to figure out what that bill should be, and it finds its way to the bill in a much more automated process. Where Energy West, it's a lot of manual calculations and work at this point.
So what I'm envisioning is that you've got two different companies delivering bills to the same customer. And so instead of having, for the ones that receive them by mail, instead of having two envelopes stamped and addressed by two different companies, there would be one envelope stamped and addressed by one company. Is that correct?
That's the way we would see it. Yes, it will take some time to align cycles. When did our bill arrive versus their bill arrive? And I think that's our customer group is experts at aligning those challenges. It may take a few billing cycles to be able to align that.
Okay, so
and work with the commission to what it'll take to get that as quickly as we can to one bill sent.
okay. So does that increased efficiency translate to a savings to the customer?
Well, again, I think any savings that we do should translate its way to the customer. I mean, that's the general context of rate making, and I know you know that. So it would be hard pressed for me to say no. The discussion that we're probably kicking the can down the road is, again, I think we're gonna perform more efficient. They're less cost right now, but they're less cost for a lot of reasons that I just gave. And the conversation's going to be is, should they be allowed to be left as a area rate where they get to realize all the efficiencies? Or do they contribute to the total like Mr. O'Brien was testifying, or do they contribute to the total denominator to hold everybody's rates lower in a socialized process? I think that's what we're asking for today, is to approve the testimony, let us learn and understand what those efficiencies are so that we can better understand that future conversation that we know is yet to come.
So what I'm trying to drive at is there seems to be an assumption that the larger company with the automated systems will be more efficient, and therefore the customer would benefit from that in terms of not only reliable billing, for example, but also reduce costs, because you don't have this manual process. It's more labor intensive, and labor is one of the large factors in providing the service. So what I'm trying to get at is that true? Is it really true that Northwestern's automated systems and its meter reading efficiencies with upgraded meters, does that really save the customer money?
Well, I believe it does. I also would say that take the labor perspective. With efficiencies, you would expect we would need less labor. And I think the direction that the company is taking, which I applaud, we will offer employment to all of Energy West Montana employees that wish to come over. That's going to have, even if we're more efficient, then what are we doing with those folks? You have to deal with that. We know that on a certain level of time, that within our own company, we're going to see level of attrition within our company. Our intentions to overcome that, what will be on day one an actual increase in cost and labor over time, through both efficiencies. We won't need them to do the jobs that they've historically done, but through attrition, we know that we will be able to utilize their talents and embed them within the organization. We need some time in order to understand all of that. It's very complex to be able to just simply predict what the path of an employee is going to be. And not knowing who's going to attrit from our company, who we bring over. In the mix of efficiencies, there are going to be some upward pressures on costs right out the gate. I do think we will overcome those very quickly. I can tell you that it is, with my knowledge of this business, we will perform to the requests of our customers seamlessly in terms of the service we provide. At a baseline, there will be no change. Over time, I think they're going to realize more service and more service quality. What acquisition of this from an operational perspective, I mean, it belongs in our organization. It fits so nicely within the towns and areas that we already serve. It's going to provide service response capabilities that historically for Northwestern customers, we couldn't justify having more staff out there because there wasn't enough work to do there. So we were probably, it's the problem of whole integers. We probably needed 1.5 people. So we went with one person and we supported longer distances from other areas. The cut bank gas provides an opportunity at our northern end of our system. There is now a work crew that can provide for Northwestern. And from an Energy West perspective, they're not out there on an island in Cut Bank like they were before. We have a workforce that's very close proximity. Those efficiencies and effectiveness for our customers will be born. I'm absolutely certain of it.
Thank you. I appreciate that. I think you've gone well outside of my narrow scope or attempted narrow scope of questioning, but I think it's very informative for the commission and any public that may be following the case. But I do want to get one thing clear. President Molnar had, when he was leading up to his question to you, after you had said that the advanced meters are more efficient, and I think you mean more cost efficient, is that correct?
It's a bit more of an efficiency discussion.
Well, are the advanced meters more cost efficient than the manual meter reading?
Certainly more efficient than the manual meter reading.
Cost efficient.
Yes.
Okay. So do those cost efficiencies translate to customer savings?
I think as one component, that's going to be an element that's going to put downward pressure on future rate reviews from a customer perspective.
Okay. So it is your testimony that the advanced meters should result in cost savings overall to customers?
From the element that you're coming at this, yes. The question is, from all the other services that are provided,
no, just
by going to that technology, those are the things that oppose the cost savings, but customers want it. So it's hard to just simply say that if we put an AM meter, cost should go down. It's more complex than that.
Okay, well, you know, I know this is not something that was drilled down in the case, but since you brought it up, and I've asked questions about this before, and so have constituents, that Northwestern openly promoted that moving to the advanced meters would be more cost efficient and save customers money. And so I want to know, yes or no, is it Northwestern's position that the advanced meters save customers money?
From a meter reading activity, yes, they save money. And in this case right here, for most of those 32,000 customers, they will already leverage an infrastructure that's already put in place. And that's the electric meters that Northwestern energy installed. The grid is already put in place to be able to receive them. The cost allocation of who shares what part of that will be a discussion. But for meter reading, yes, they are more efficient way to read meters.
Thank you. Appreciate that.
Thank you, President or Vice President.
That's all, Mr. Chair.
Commissioner Bukacek.
It's going to sound more like a statement, but there is a question at the end.
Okay.
All right. So I've been in medical practice for 40 plus years, and over 30 years of those, I've been in private practice. I own my own solo practice, which is kind of against the trend of how things have gone nationally. I've never been particularly impressed that bigger is better. My small practice, I think, is the best. But anyway, I've gone from everything manual that I did once upon a time to everything automated. It was more or less as a requirement from insurance companies and so on of being part of a larger, more sophisticated system. It's been a requirement. And I haven't exactly gone kicking and screaming. I actually like electronic medical records and those kinds of things. But it certainly has not decreased the cost of my care. So I'm thinking with regionalization move, modernization of the grid requirements, which includes these SMRs that some people like and some people don't. Is there a correlation with the monopoly utilities as with my profession? Would you agree? There's some things that are required because of regionalization, because of requirement of modernization of the grid. Or there's some things that are required for efficiency within that context that might not necessarily decrease the cost, but they're required to move on.
I can't think of the example. I still want to say yes to that question, but I just can't think of an example right now. To your point, though, in the example that you used, their requirements maybe drove you to go into those new technologies, but I'm sure you realize that your customers have better service and also enjoy the opportunity of those decisions. And I know that there are going to be requirements of us that will be better met by all the technology that we're putting on our system. That's always a key driver in our decisions on can we do something easier by adding technology is always part of the consideration of the addition of technology. So compliance is certainly one requirement of that.
Thank you,
and
sir.
a driver. Thank you.
Appreciate it.
Any other commissioner questions? All right, I just have a couple to bring out. So we talked a little bit about Sleepy Hollow, and boy, it's very true. The natural gas to Sleepy Hollow was mostly supplied by Northwest Energy, and when they walked off the job, they had a choice of either we get Northwest Energy on board, or they would have had to have spent millions to move to propane. We're talking about an entire town. Winifred just built the new high school, for instance. I can't thank you enough on that. This was a very good example of a more efficient system already in place, and you were able to lower the rates. But here we've got a company who had lower rates than Sleepy Hollow, and they weren't having any problems. And the other thing that I'm battling for the last few years is this. When there was a rate increase with Energy West, what Energy West would say was, we're cheaper than Northwest Energy, so don't complain. And this has trained thousands of people inside of Great Falls to say Energy West has lower rates. Now, the factories inside of Great Falls, one my family owned, when it was 20 below, the heating bill was $1,000 a day. It's pretty important that you have Energy West when you're spending $1,000 a day to heat a factory, okay? And it's music to my ears if you're able to say, we do this and we can lower rates, lower possibly, right? Knowing that they may need a rate increase, I understand that. But do you think that And here's the tough question. For many, many years, Energy West has been cheaper than Northwest Energy. Do you think that you can change that? And you're right, postage on 30,000 pieces of mail a month, well, your stamp is like 50 cents. You got the cost of the number 10 envelope, then the number 9 return envelope, and then you got the cost of the statement. If we can cut our statements in half by sending the gas statement, the electric statement, you're talking about, maybe $40,000, $50,000 a month, right, in savings. And I was listening very carefully. Your statement to send out the bill may go out, the first week of the month, where your statement's going to go out on the 15th, and perhaps we have to approve that. And I'll be very quick to want you to do that and approve that. But I want to make sure that that savings, at least part of it, goes to the ratepayer, right? That's something the commission has to watch. I want to talk a little bit about gas meters, and I want you to know that we're under a lot of pressure here on the meter, the smart meter, okay? All kinds of concerns. The natural gas smart meter, I've held it in my hands, I've picked it up, I even took the damn thing apart. One of the most impressive things about the smart gas meter is this. When you are operating equipment, or you're in your house and you break a gas line and the gas free flows, the smart meter will shut off in a free flow situation. This will save lives. And I'm really impressed with that because our goal is safe, reliable, and affordable. But I attend meetings across the country with NARUC, and I listen to utilities say, look, one of the first things we have to do is we have to get to the smart meter. Well, we can lay off all our meter readers, which cost millions of dollars for some companies, right? Full-time employees with benefits, and you're going to save a lot of money. And things are much more streamlined. You're able to get more accurate readings with a smart meter. You're able to get them very quickly. The other benefit to the smart meter is that you're able to shut the power off without sending a truck to manually remove the meter. You're able to turn the power off or turn the power off at a location without sending anyone. So I think Commissioner Fielder and Molnar certainly have a good question, but to go a little farther, the savings of getting the meter reader out of the picture, the savings of not sending someone to the home to physically pull a meter or physically turn off a meter, that savings is so great that the utilities across the country are saying, we're doing this whether you like it or not. The appointed public service commissions across this country are told by who appoints them, you're going to approve this. The only commissions that bring these questions up, in my opinion, are the elected positions. Now, I know utilities are saving a great deal of money moving to the smart meter, okay? And I explained why. But the question is, why would we charge extra to put the smart meter in when I know that your profits are better putting the smart meter in? And if we do put in the smart meter, just start replacing those in Great Falls as you take over, can we count on that helping rates to come down? Or are they going to turn around and say, you're going to pay, the ratepayer is going to pay to install these? What are your thoughts there?
There was a lot there, Commissioner. First of all, again, I'll remind you, I'm not in the rate making development portion of this company. I do understand our costs. You're pointing out one thing that through efficiency costs should be reduced. How that makes its way to a total rate review perspective, I have no clarity to, because I do know that rate making is complex and it has to take into account all the other cause and effects that go on through that period. I mean, you're talking about an opportunity with Northwestern to own Energy West is, I know right now their credit disconnects, for example. They have to go turn off the gas. And in our processes and methods where we have combination utilities. So like for Kalispell, this wouldn't be true, but any place in our larger cities and communities where we are the electric provider, we use electric first to control that customer behavior. In other words, we shut off the electric. We don't shut off the gas, because as soon as you shut off the gas, that creates the need for pilot lights to be relit and those type of things. So we use electric to control the customer. The appliance won't run typically without electric. So we will go a period of days to say your electric is off. And then of course you have to pay both bills that you're in arrears. Get the electric turned back on. And then if they continue without paying the bill, we ultimately will show up and shut up the gas. But currently for Energy West to manage the non-pays in their world, they shut off the gas. So that's just an example of there's efficiencies in what I just described, but how that makes its way to a total rate review discussion and single issue rate making, I'm not the person to ask that question to.
All right, you brought up the pilot light issue, and you're absolutely correct. We shut gas off, and then you have a lot of man hours. You're paying really good wages. You have to go to those homes, or especially the elderly people who say, wow, you got to turn my pilot light on. So let's talk about the sniff test. On the board of directors of the Landlord Association, I say every time you have a tenant move out and move in, you call the gas company and you have them perform the sniff test, where they bring in equipment to make sure that we don't have unburned hydrocarbons or burned hydrocarbons leaking inside the home. We could have a nest in the stack of the hot water heater or the furnace, which causes gas to backfeed into the home, and it's very dangerous and it can kill people. So I get a complaint that, hey, Pinocchio called Northwest Energy and they're refusing to do that test. We're not going to do it anymore. Energy West still does it. Our job here is safe, reliable, and affordable. And I think it's really important, and I encourage everyone, especially if you're going to buy a home, that you have this test done, and the energy company comes in with a handheld device and they walk around and do that. Is that something that's discontinued? Is that something that will be brought back to life? What are your thoughts there? And I know this isn't in your testimony, but I got to bring these questions out that my district is saying, look, here's some concerns. What customer service is Energy West doing that Northwestern isn't doing? And perhaps Energy West discontinued doing this, because I haven't asked that question last I heard. The other reason I think you haven't is I haven't had a complaint that you're not doing it, but I'm certainly getting the complaints that Northwest Energy discontinued this. Is there anything you can tell me about that?
All I can tell you is what is in my testimony is the services that we provide our customers at Northwestern Energy are absolutely consistent with the services that Energy West provides. We didn't see a difference, with one exception. And that was discussed here, is that USB funds are allowed to support Energy Share in the purchase of, I think it's both purchase and maintenance of furnaces and customer equipment inside the home. Other than that one program, the services provided by Energy West, in our discussions with the manager of Energy West, are consistent with the way they perform services.
The sniff test, if someone calls, you guys are still doing that?
Yes. What we will do is it's situational. by the individual. They're not required to go in the home. They may go to the home, but what they will do is identify is if there's any leaks to the home. You don't have to go in the home in order to do that. You can shut off the appliances at the home and you can do a meter test outside and determine if there's any leaks to the piping or facilities within the home. Carbon monoxide is a different animal.
Well, I'm encouraging the use of carbon monoxide detectors in every home. Any other questions from commissioners? Then I'll turn it over to Lucas Hamilton. No questions. Any redirect?
Mr. Chairman, just for the record, because this is kind of outside the normal process, just to ask Mr. Merkel a couple preliminary questions so that we establish who he is and who he's here on behalf of, if that would be okay.
That's fine.
Okay. Mr. Merkel, would you please state your name, spelling your last name and your business address for the record?
Jason Merkel, last name spelled Merkel. My business address, my office is at 1315 North Last Chance Gulch.
And by whom are you employed?
I'm employed by Northwestern Energy. Thank you.
You're welcome. And what is your title at Northwestern Energy?
My title is Vice President of Distribution.
Thank you, Mr. Merkel. And no further questions, Mr. Chairman.
You want to permanently excuse this witness?
Yes, please.
All right, no objection. Everybody's okay with that? Okay, sir, you're excused. And I guess this is a good time to break for lunch? Or do we want to end the hearing?
Mr. Chair, parties, do you think we can wrap this up in the next 20 minutes?
Mr. Chairman, Mr. Hamilton, I guess that would depend on the commission and if there's questions for further witnesses of Northwestern.
Mr. Chair, I think we are done with commissioner questions.
Do parties wish to present a brief closing statement?
Mr. Chairman, no.
Well, with that, this hearing's closed. Oh, it says right here. What are you adding?
Mr. Chair and parties, normally at the close of our evidentiary hearing, we have a brief scheduling conference to discuss post-hearing briefing. Would the parties like to submit post-hearing briefing in this matter?
Mr. Chairman, Mr. Hamilton, no, we would not. Thank you.
Very good. And then, Mr. Chairman, the last element at every public hearing is one more round of public comment. Would you like to open that up?
Okay, we're open for public comment. Any public comment in the room or online? All right, seeing none. And that's it. Time's 12:03.